Okay, before you click away, hear me out. I know what you're thinking. You saw the title, you felt something between curiosity and mild revulsion, and now you're hovering. One hand on the mouse, one eyebrow raised, deciding whether this is worth your next 10 minutes. Stay, because what you're about to discover is one of those things that sounds disgusting right up until the moment it starts making so much sense that you feel slightly embarrassed for ever thinking it was gross. Coprophagy, the formal, scientific, considerably more dignified word for eating feces. And across the animal kingdom, it is shockingly, almost impressively widespread. We're not talking about a few desperate outliers making bad decisions in the cold light of morning. We're talking about a behavior practiced by rabbits, elephants, gorillas, hippos, giant pandas, koalas, dogs, rats, dung beetles, and hundreds of other species. Often not occasionally, not accidentally, but deliberately, consistently, and by evolutionary design. These animals are not confused. They are not suffering some collective lapse in judgment. They are doing something that their biology has been refined over millions of years to do, for reasons that are, once you actually examine them, kind of spectacular. So here's how this works. Picture a rabbit in a field. It's dawn. The rabbit has been grazing through the night, pulling in grass and plant material with the focused efficiency of a creature that needs to extract maximum nutrition from minimum effort. Morning arrives, and then the rabbit does something that if you've ever watched a rabbit closely enough, you've probably seen and immediately tried to process without fully processing. It bends around, retrieves something directly from its own body, and eats it. Not a pellet of dry feces. Something different. Yeah, something softer, darker, almost grape-like in appearance, called a cecotrope. And the rabbit eats it with exactly the same calm, unflustered energy it brings to eating grass. Because to the rabbit, this is breakfast. This is specifically, biologically, intentionally breakfast. This is where the genius begins. Rabbits have a digestive system facing a fundamental problem. Plant material, the cellulose in grass and leafy vegetation, is extraordinarily difficult to break down. The nutrients locked inside plant cells are surrounded by cell walls that most digestive systems struggle to penetrate efficiently. Ruminants like cows solve this by having multi-chambered stomachs that allow for extended fermentation with microbial assistance. Rabbits evolved a different solution, and it's considerably more dramatic. The rabbit's cecum, a pouch at the junction of the small and large intestine, is an enormous fermentation chamber relative to body size, packed with bacteria that break down cellulose and extract nutrients that a single pass through the digestive system couldn't access. The cecum produces cecotropes, soft, protein-rich, bacteria-laden packages that contain B vitamins, amino acids, fatty acids, and microbial proteins that the rabbit's body couldn't produce or absorb on the first pass-through. The rabbit eats the cecotropes directly from its body, often before they even hit the ground, and sends them back through the digestive tract for a second pass. The nutrients that were locked up in the first round of fermentation are now available for absorption in the small intestine. Efficiency dramatically increases. The rabbit extracts from a pile of grass what would otherwise require a much larger digestive system or a much larger volume of food to obtain. This is cecotrophy, and it's not gross. It's a recycling system of almost breathtaking elegance. The rabbit built a second stomach out of its own waste stream. If an engineer designed this and pitched it as a solution to the problem of extracting maximum nutrition from low-quality plant material, everyone in the room would nod appreciatively. When a rabbit does it in your backyard, your instinct is to look away. The instinct is wrong, and rabbits are far from alone in this particular solution. Chinchillas do it. Guinea pigs do it. Various rodent species across multiple families do it. The cecotrophy strategy turns out to be a reliable, convergent solution to the how do you extract nutrition from plant cellulose without a ruminant's multi-chambered stomach problem. And evolution arrived at it independently in multiple lineages because it works. Now, move to something larger. Much larger. Elephants, the largest land animals on Earth, also eat feces. Specifically, young elephants eat the feces of adult elephants, and they do so for a reason that illuminates one of the most important and underappreciated functions of coprophagy across the animal kingdom: microbiome transfer. An elephant's digestive system, like that of all large herbivores, depends critically on a complex community of gut microorganisms, bacteria, archaea, protozoa, that are collectively responsible for fermenting plant material and extracting energy that would otherwise be unavailable. These microorganisms are not inherited genetically. They have to be acquired. A newborn elephant enters the world with a largely sterile gut and needs to populate it with the right microbial community to develop functional digestion. Where do those microbes come from? From the environment, from contact with adults, and directly from adult feces, which is a dense, concentrated package of exactly the microbial community the young elephant needs. When a baby elephant deliberately eats adult dung, which they do, Openly, regularly, and apparently with enthusiasm, they are essentially taking a microbial inoculation. They are seeding their gut with the complex ecosystem they need to function. This is extraordinarily smart. Not consciously smart, the elephant isn't thinking through the logic of gut microbiome establishment, but evolutionarily smart in the sense that elephants whose young instinctively sought out adult feces would have had better developed digestive systems and better survival rates, and that instinct would have been selected for over generations until it became a reliable behavioral feature of the species. Gorillas do something similar. Giant pandas do it. Hippopotamus calves eat their mother's feces. Koala joeys, in a particularly striking example, eat a specialized fecal matter produced by the mother called pap, a semi-liquid substance produced for the joey to consume, different from normal feces, produced during the transition period as the joey's gut needs to be inoculated with the microbes necessary to digest eucalyptus leaves. Eucalyptus leaves are toxic to most animals. They contain phenolic compounds and terpenes that are genuinely poisonous to organisms that lack the microbial and enzymatic tools to detoxify them. Koalas can eat eucalyptus because their gut microbiome contains specialized bacteria capable of breaking down the toxins. But those bacteria have to come from somewhere. The joey gets them from the mother through pap consumption during a developmental window. Without this transfer, the joey's gut would lack the microbial tools to process its primary food source. The PAP is not incidental. It's the mechanism by which eucalyptus eating is even possible for young koalas. If that isn't brilliant, the word has lost its meaning. The microbiome transfer function of coprophagy extends well beyond these examples and into territory that, the more it's studied, the more fundamental it appears. Gut microbiomes are extraordinarily complex ecosystems. Healthy mammalian guts contain hundreds or thousands of microbial species in relationships of mutual dependence that researchers are still mapping. The composition of this ecosystem matters enormously for immune function, metabolic efficiency, neurological development, and resistance to pathogenic infection. Establishing the right gut microbiome in early life appears to be one of the most consequential biological events for any mammal, with effects that persist across the entire lifespan. And for many species, the reliable mechanism for establishing that microbiome is direct exposure to the feces of healthy, established adults. The grossness is the point. High contact with fecal material from healthy conspecifics is a high-bandwidth transfer channel for exactly the microbial information the young animal needs. Now pivot to something entirely different, a creature whose relationship with feces is so central to its ecological role that its name is literally a reference to it: the dung beetle. There are roughly 6,000 species of dung beetle across the world, distributed across every continent except Antarctica, operating in ecosystems ranging from tropical rainforests to African savannas to temperate grasslands. They are among the most ecologically important insects on Earth, and their entire existence is organized around feces, in a way that makes everything else on this list look casual. Dung beetles locate feces, primarily mammalian dung, through olfaction, detecting specific volatile compounds that indicate fresh material. Some species are so specialized that they track specific host species. They arrive rapidly at fresh dung, assess it, and begin processing it in one of three behavioral modes depending on species: rolling balls of dung across the landscape and burying them elsewhere, tunneling under the dung pile, and burying material below, or simply living within the dung pile itself. They eat the dung. They lay their eggs in it. Their larvae develop inside it, eating it as they grow. The dung is food, habitat, and nursery simultaneously, and the ecological consequences of this behavior are profound. Dung beetles bury enormous quantities of animal waste, returning nitrogen, phosphorus, and organic matter to the soil in a form that plants can access. They reduce surface fouling that would otherwise create ideal conditions for parasitic fly larvae. They break the life cycle of various gastrointestinal parasites by burying eggs before they can mature and reinfect the host animal. In African savanna ecosystems, where large herbivore biomass is enormous, the rate of dung production would create serious environmental problems without rapid processing, and dung beetles provide that processing at a scale that no other organism approaches. Studies removing dung beetle activity from pasture systems have shown measurable decreases in soil fertility, increases in fly populations, and increases in parasite loads in grazing animals within surprisingly short time periods. The feces eating is not peripheral to the ecosystem's function. In many ecosystems it's load-bearing. Remove it, and things start falling apart. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content, covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. The dung beetle navigates using the Milky Way. Not metaphorically, actual celestial navigation using the galactic light band as a reference during nighttime dung rolling. This was discovered relatively recently and promptly broke several researchers' brains, because using the galaxy as a compass while rolling a ball of animal waste across the African savanna at midnight is the kind of behavioral complexity that keeps rewriting assumptions about insect cognition. The beetle has a job to do. It uses the stars to do it efficiently. It is not here to be underestimated. Dogs deserve their own honest examination here because dog coprophagy is extremely common, extremely distressing to dog owners, and extremely underexplained in most of the literature written for dog owners, which tends to frame it as a behavioral problem rather than examining why it happens. Dogs eat feces, their own, other dogs, and the feces of other species, with what appears to be genuine preference for certain types. Survey data from dog owners suggests that somewhere between 16 and 23% of dogs eat feces regularly, with higher rates in multi-dog households. Attempts to deter the behavior through dietary supplementation, taste deterrence, and training have mixed results, suggesting that for at least some dogs, the drive is relatively robust. The evolutionary backstory matters here. Domestic dogs are descended from wolves, and wolves are pack animals that raise pups in dens. Den hygiene matters. A fouled den is a disease risk and an attractant for parasites and predators. Adult wolves and dogs historically cleaned the den by consuming the feces of pups, preventing accumulation. This behavior in adult canids caring for young makes complete functional sense. The instinct that drove it appears to have persisted in domestic dogs in a somewhat generalized form. The behavioral tendency toward feces consumption remains active even in contexts where den hygiene is not the relevant pressure. Additionally, for dogs in the wild and for their wolf ancestors, eating the feces of large herbivores was a nutritional supplement. Herbivore dung contains partially digested plant material, microbial protein from gut bacteria, and in some cases, significant caloric value. A wolf that ignored this resource was leaving nutrition on the table. The instinct to investigate and consume feces of other species persists in domestic dogs as a behavioral vestige of this resource utilization strategy. The dog eating cat feces from the litter box is not broken. The dog is following drives shaped by millions of years of canid evolution that said feces is a resource. Investigate it, consume it if it has value. That the modern domestic context makes this behavior inconvenient and socially unacceptable doesn't change its evolutionary logic. Rats also practice coprophagy, and in rats it serves some of the same functions as in rabbits, specifically nutrient recovery from partially digested material and maintenance of gut microbiome integrity. Rats deprived of their own feces show nutritional deficiencies that can be corrected by restoring access. The behavior in rats is routine, regular, and physiologically important in ways that rat research has illuminated with unusual clarity precisely because rats are so extensively studied as laboratory animals. The gorilla case is worth dwelling on further because it illustrates another dimension of coprophagy beyond microbiome transfer, specifically seed recovery. Gorillas eat large quantities of fruit, and many fruit seeds pass through the digestive tract intact. In gorilla feces, these seeds are not only viable, but are often coated with nutrients from the digestive process, primed for germination in a way that can actually improve germination rates compared to seeds that haven't passed through a gut. When gorillas revisit and consume their own feces, they recover some of these seeds in a form that allows for secondary digestion of material that adhered to the seeds during gut passage. But the broader seed story here is gorillas as dispersal agents. When they don't consume their feces, the seeds in gorilla dung are planted across the forest at distances that reflect the gorilla's ranging behavior. The gut of a gorilla is a seed transport system. The feces is the delivery package. The forest floor receives planting in a spatially distributed pattern that benefits from the gorilla's movement and feeding ecology. The coprophagy behavior intersects with this larger ecological function in complicated ways that are still being worked out. The hippopotamus is another animal whose coprophagic behavior sits within a larger ecological context that changes how you think about it. Hippos spend their days in water and emerge at night to graze on land, returning to water by morning. During aquatic rest periods, they defecate in the water, an enormous amount of feces relative to body size, deposited in rivers and lakes that they share with fish and other aquatic organisms. Hippofeces is rich in organic material that feeds algae and microorganisms at the base of aquatic food chains. Rivers with hippo populations are more productive in terms of fish biomass than comparable rivers without hippos, partly because of this nutrient input. The hippo's digestive processing concentrates nutrients from the surrounding terrestrial landscape and deposits them into the aquatic system in a bioavailable form. The feces is an ecological subsidy from land to water, mediated by an animal that spends its life on the boundary between the two systems. When hippo calves consume maternal feces, they're inoculating their guts with microbes suited to a hippo's specific digestive challenges. A plant-based diet consumed in large quantities by an animal with a non-ruminant digestive system that nonetheless needs to process cellulose efficiently. The microbial transfer is the mechanism by which the next generation acquires the digestive tools the species depends on. Bring it back now to something that most people have never considered, but that might be the most far-reaching application of the feces as resource insight: pharmaceutical and medical research on fecal matter. Fecal microbiota transplantation, the deliberate transfer of fecal material from a healthy donor to a recipient with disrupted gut microbiome, has become one of the more remarkable developments in human medicine in recent decades. For Clostridioides difficile infections that resist antibiotic treatment, fecal transplants have cure rates exceeding 90%, dramatically outperforming antibiotics. The mechanism is exactly what it sounds like: reseeding the disrupted gut ecosystem with microbial community from a healthy gut, restoring functional balance. This is mechanistically the same thing the baby elephant is doing, the same thing the koala joey is doing, the same thing the gorilla and the rat and the rabbit are doing in various forms. Humans spent centuries developing the intellectual framework to understand why it works, the sanitary infrastructure to do it safely in clinical settings, and the regulatory pathways to make it available as a treatment. The animals got there by evolution and instinct, without the overhead. Across all of these examples, a unifying logic emerges that reframes the entire phenomenon. Feces in biological reality is not simply waste. It is processed material, partially transformed by digestion, colonized by a dense and complex microbial community, carrying chemical information about the organism that produced it, and containing residual nutritional value that varies depending on the efficiency of the producer's digestive system and the quality of what was originally consumed. For animals with the biological machinery to access what feces contains, it represents a resource. For animals that need microbial populations and can acquire them most reliably through concentrated exposure to healthy adult feces, coprophagy is the most efficient available mechanism. For ecosystems that depend on nutrient cycling, the animals that process feces, from dung beetles working the macro scale to gut bacteria working the microscopic scale, are doing work that keeps everything else running. The disgust response humans bring to feces is not universal across cultures and is specifically intense in modern post-sanitation revolution contexts, where the association between feces and disease transmission is well established and highly reinforced. That response exists for good reasons in a human context. Human feces does transmit disease effectively, and cultural norms that create strong avoidance of fecal contact do reduce disease transmission meaningfully. But the disgust response is a heuristic, not a universal truth. Applied indiscriminately to all feces in all contexts across all species, it generates the incorrect conclusion that coprophagy is universally aberrant and maladaptive. It's not. In most of the cases examined here, it's adaptive, often dramatically so. The rabbit would die of nutritional deficiency without cecotrophy. The koala joey would be unable to digest its primary food source without pap consumption. The baby elephant would establish a poor gut microbiome without access to adult dung. The dung beetle would not exist, and the ecosystems that depend on it would be measurably worse off. Evolution doesn't design behaviors out of aesthetic preferences. It designs behaviors out of survival outcomes. When a behavior as metabolically and behaviorally invested as coprophagy appears across hundreds of species independently, the explanation is not that hundreds of species made the same mistake. The explanation is that the behavior confers advantages substantial enough to drive its repeated independent evolution. The title said genius. That word was chosen deliberately, and having gone through the evidence, the argument holds. Genius doesn't always look elegant from the outside. Sometimes it looks like a rabbit eating something it just produced before it hits the ground. Sometimes it looks like a baby elephant following a very direct instinct toward the nearest dung pile. Sometimes it looks like 6,000 species of beetle building their entire ecological niche around something every other animal walks away from. The insight is not that feces is secretly pleasant, or that the disgust response is wrong. The insight is that the animal kingdom has, across millions of years and in dozens of independent lineages, looked at what appears to be waste and found resource, mechanism, and adaptation where the human instinct sees only something to avoid. That realization, that our intuitive category of waste maps poorly onto biological reality, is the kind of thing that once you see it, you can't unsee. And honestly, it should probably change how confidently you trust your first reaction to anything that sounds immediately unappealing. Because sometimes the gross thing is the genius thing. The rabbit already knew.